In the heart of West Africa, nestled between savanna and forest, rose two ancient kingdoms, Zante and Kandora. Zante was known for its powerful warriors, gold mines, and cunning king, Mana the Unforgiving. Kandora, by contrast, was a peaceful, fertile land ruled by wisdom, culture, and a lineage of revered queens. For centuries, the two lands existed in careful distance, separated not just by rivers and hills, but by politics, ambition, and blood. Lucius was born under moonlight and silence, an illegitimate child, whispered into the palace as a secret, raised in the shadow of golden thrones. Though his mother was a village healer and not a queen, Lucius grew into a sharp, noble figure, tall, dark-eyed, with the fire of both ambition and yearning in his chest. King Mana saw potential in him but never love. Lucius was a tool, a blade to be unsheathed when needed. When whispers reached King Mana that Kandora's queen had grown ill and her only daughter, Princess Milan, had begun to court suitors, he devised a plan. He called Lucius to his war room, dark with oil lamps and stone maps. "Go," the king commanded, "win her heart, bend her will, and when she trusts you, Kandora shall kneel to Zante." Lucius, desperate to prove his worth, bowed deeply. He did not yet know that love would betray every sword, every crown, every kingdom. The journey from Zante to Kandora was long, winding through thorned roads and whispering groves. Lucius rode with a small caravan, posing as a scholar and poet seeking peace and beauty. He practiced his smiles, rehearsed his charm, and carried scrolls of love songs written for a woman he'd never met. But beneath the silken lies lay a quiet storm. He had always felt like an imposter. Now he was playing one for war. Kandora was unlike any land he had seen. The air was thick with perfume from blooming flowers, and every child laughed as though their world was untouched by conquest. The palace gates opened to him not with suspicion, but with open arms. Princess Milan, radiant and strong-willed, greeted him with a smirk and an eyebrow raised. "A poet?" she asked, "or another dreamer?" Lucius could only smile, his practiced charm momentarily undone by her fierce grace. Days turned to weeks. He shared songs by the river. She danced under moonlight. Lucius began to forget the maps etched in war rooms, the letters sealed with blood. He saw in Milan not just a princess, but a mirror, a soul wild and caged, clever and kind. And for the first time in his life, Lucius did not feel like a pawn or bastard. He felt chosen. Lucius found himself captivated not just by Milan's beauty, but by the way she listened. She didn't just hear his poetry, she questioned it, challenged it, asked what lay between the lines. Each conversation between them was a dance, every glance a duel. The game he was sent to play became a dream he did not want to wake from. Princess Milan, daughter of Queen Salama, was no stranger to politics or pretense. She had seen suitors kneel with golden promises, only to chase her crown. But Lucius was different. He didn't flinch at her intellect, nor was he obsessed with her status. She began to laugh more when he was near. Her guards watched carefully. The court began to whisper. At night, Lucius sat by the palace garden, staring at the moon, thinking of his father's command. But his heart was no longer loyal to strategy. It beat for Milan, and every moment spent with her pulled him further from Zante. In his dreams, she was not a target, she was a flame, and he was already burning. Back in Zante, King Mana grew impatient. His letters to Lucius remained unanswered, and his spies reported no movement towards seizing Kandora. Suspicion brewed. "The bastard grows too fond of silk," he muttered. Beside him, Elias, Mana's younger, legitimate son, listened with a smirk. Elias had always despised Lucius, born with the crown in his blood. He hated the whispers that Lucius had more courage, more charm, more heart. When King Mana confided in him about Lucius's silence, Elias saw an opportunity. "Let me go," he said, bowing mockingly. "I'll bring back your conquest and your coward son's head if you wish." The king looked at Elias for a long moment, then nodded. "Go, end this. End this." With that, Elias departed, taking with him soldiers dressed as merchants and steel hidden in cargo. War had now left the chessboard and stepped into shadow. under the mango tree by Candora's river, Lucius finally told Milan the truth, not of his mission but of his love. "I came here with a lie," he whispered, "but I stayed because of a truth." She didn't smile, nor did she retreat. She simply asked, "Then stay, as the man you are, not the weapon you were sent to be." Milan led Lucius to Queen Salama that same evening. The queen, frail but wise, listened in silence. "You were sent to deceive," she said, "but even snakes can shed old skins. If you mean to love her truly, then stand with Candora. Not just in word, but in blood." Lucius knelt. He swore it before the gods, the queen, and the woman he could no longer betray. Word spread of their love. Candora rejoiced, not knowing what crept behind the hills, Elias and his hidden swords, coming not just for Lucius, but for the heart of Candora itself. Elias entered Candora through shadowed roads. His men spread like oil through the village markets, charming guards and bribing innkeepers. Meanwhile, he watched the palace with cold eyes, hatred simmering. The sight of Lucius standing beside Princess Milan in public, laughing, beloved, was enough to drive a crack through his already venomous heart. That night, Elias broke into the palace court disguised as a nobleman from the west. He gained entry to the banquet held for Lucius and Milan's engagement. The celebration was warm, music thick in the air, but Elias's eyes never left his brother. As wine flowed, he approached Lucius with a toast, one that ended in a whispered threat. "Does she know," he hissed, "that you were meant to conquer, not cherish?" Lucius froze. Milan looked between them, sensing a shift. But before any truth could spill, a scream echoed from the gates. Soldiers, Zante-born, had begun their siege. The celebration turned to chaos. Milan was pulled away by her guards, and Lucius and Elias, once brothers, now stood face to face as enemies beneath a shattered chandelier. Lucius had never been a man of war, yet as Zante's troops stormed the lower gates of Candora, the sword on his hip no longer felt foreign, it felt necessary. He fought alongside Candora's defenders, cutting down the very men he once called kin. But as blood spattered the ivory palace walls, so too did doubt stain Lucius's soul. Milan fought too, not with weapons, but with words. She stood tall beside her people, organizing the women and elders to safety, while her guards tried to pull her away. "I will not hide," she said, "while my kingdom bleeds." When Lucius found her again in the throne hall, breathless and bruised, he fell to his knees. "This is my fault," he whispered, "and I will end it." Outside the palace, Elias watched the burning gardens and sneered. "Let him play hero," he told his commander. "We'll bring Candora down, brick by bloody brick." Queen Salama, though weak, summoned the strength to sit upon her throne as the battle reached the palace steps. Her eyes met Lucius's, no longer with suspicion but sorrow. "I once feared you," she said, "but now I fear what your love has cost us all." Lucius knelt before her, his tunic torn, his sword bloody. "Let me go to him. Elias wants me, not Candora. This war is a shadow of my father's hatred, not yours." Salama reached forward and touched his face. "You may have been born of shadow, Lucius, but love has given you light. Go, but not as a prince of Zante. Go as the man you chose to become." He rose, kissed Milan's forehead, and left into the battlefield as dusk fell. The queen turned to her daughter, her voice ragged. "Forgive me, child. In loving him, you may lose him, but in letting him go, you give him a chance to be free." Lucius met Elias on the palace bridge as the river beneath them churned with war. No guards, no army. Just the two brothers, one born of crown, the other of love. The rain began to fall, soft at first, then harder, washing blood and ash from the stone. "You betrayed Zante," Elias spat. "For what? A kiss? A crown of flowers?" Lucius stepped forward, his sword lowered. "For truth, for peace, for something our father never taught us." Elias's eyes darkened, "Then die with your poetry." And with a scream he lunged. Their swords clashed like thunder, echoing through the crumbling palace. Neither spoke. It was a fight carved by childhood wounds, fatherly neglect, jealousy, and years of unspoken rage. And as the bridge cracked beneath them, both knew only one would leave it standing. Milan ran into the rain barefoot, screaming for them to stop. The sound of steel and thunder filled the air, but her voice rose above it. "You are brothers," she cried. "This isn't the way." But neither man heard her. Or perhaps they chose not to. Elias slipped first. His foot caught the edge of the broken stone, and Lucius reached out instinctively, grabbing his arm, eyes wide with terror. But Elias, prideful even in death, snarled and swung his blade again. This time it caught Lucius's shoulder. They both fell. Milan reached the bridge as their bodies struck the water below. She dove in without hesitation, but the river was unforgiving. It swallowed them all, Lucius, Elias, and Milan, dragging their story into its ancient silent depths. When the storm cleared, the battlefield lay quiet. Bodies of both Zante and Candora soldiers were buried together in the soaked earth. At the riverbank, 3 stones were carved, one for Lucius, the prince who defied war, one for Milan, the princess who loved fiercely, and one for Elias, the prince consumed by pride. Queen Salama lived only a week after the funeral. Her final decree was etched in Candoran law. Let no child be judged by their parents' sin. Let no love be punished by politics. And so, in memory of 3 hearts broken by duty, a peace treaty was signed between Zante and Candora, binding them forever. But in taverns, around fires, and whispered in lovers' beds, their story was told again and again. Not as a tale of kingdoms or crowns, but of love that dared to bloom in a garden of swords. Word of Lucius and Elias's deaths reached Zante before the rain dried in Candora. King Mana, old and hunched, received the message with a hardened face. But when he read the details, that both his sons had died fighting each other, and the mission had failed, he turned pale, his strength draining like sand through fingers. Alone in his chamber, King Mana stared at the royal mirror, but did not recognize the man reflected. He had sent his firstborn to deceive, and his second to destroy, and now both were dust. He smashed the mirror with his staff. "My crown sits heavy," he whispered, "and hollow." From that day, the once feared king of Zante was rarely seen in public. The gold on his throne dulled. In his court, advisors whispered he lost the war, yes, but worse, he lost both sons. His silence screamed louder than his commands ever had. In Candora, as peace was patched slowly together, Queen Salama's handmaiden discovered a journal beneath Princess Milan's pillow. It was bound in silk, its pages smelling of lavender and war. The queen had passed, but the journal lived. In her own hand, Milan had written of Lucius from the moment she met him. Her suspicions, her delights, her doubts, her dreams. "He came to conquer," she wrote, "but instead he became a garden, and I his bloom." In the final entry, dated the night before the battle, she wrote, "Even if we die, let it be known we chose love over legacy." The pages were copied and read across the kingdom, and later across Zante. In markets and schools, her words inspired tears and questions. Could love truly change the path of history? Could one heart break centuries of bloodshed? Years passed. A small village on the riverbank where the 3 lovers had drowned grew from tents to huts, and from huts to stone. It was named Lucien, after the prince who dared to defy a king. Farmers said the soil was rich with memory. At the center of Lucien stood a carved statue. Lucius, Milan, and Elias, 3 young faces lifted toward the wind, carved not in war but in reflection. Tourists came from distant lands to hear the tale, but the elders told it slow, with heavy eyes. "This is not a story of lovers," they'd say. "It's a story of choices." Children born in Lucien were taught never to judge by bloodlines, but by actions. A festival was held every year on the day of the storm, not to mourn the lost, but to celebrate peace that had risen from pain. One evening, a stranger entered Lucien. Cloaked in blue and dust, he walked with a cane and a golden chain around his wrist. He visited the statue, knelt before the carved Lucius, and placed a small metal crown at its feet. The villagers watched from a distance, curious but silent. The man stood, turned to them, and spoke. "I am the last living son of King Mana. My name is Kale. I was born after the war, but I was raised on the ashes of my father's regret. He told them the truth, that Mana had died in his sleep with his sons' names on his lips, and that Kandora and Zante, now joined by trade and treaty, had built schools where war camps once stood. Let this crown stay buried here, Kale said, for there is no greater crown than peace. That night, for the first time in decades, fireflies returned to the riverbank of Lucian. Some said it was just the season. Others believed it was something more, a sign, a whisper, a nod from the spirits of those who died too soon. At the river, a young girl named Abeni sat alone, sketching in the dirt. She had read Milan's journal 4 times. Her favorite line was, "Love is not weakness, it is a rebellion." She recited it like a prayer. Abeni's father watched her and smiled. "You will change the world," he said. And deep in the heart of Africa, where once kingdoms clashed, a new kind of power began to grow, not of swords or crowns, but of stories passed down and reborn. That night, Abeni dreamed she stood on the very bridge where Lucius and Elias once fought. But the river wasn't red, it was clear, glowing with stars. Across it stood Milan, dressed in white, her eyes sad but kind. "Tell it right," she whispered. "Tell our truth." Abeni awoke breathless, the words echoing like a drumbeat in her chest. She ran to her father, still rubbing sleep from his eyes, and demanded ink, parchment, and a candle. "I have to write it down," she said. "All of it, before the truth becomes a fairy tale." For 3 days, Abeni didn't leave the hut. She wrote as though the spirits guided her hand. Her father watched silently. He knew sometimes children carry the stories too heavy for adults to finish. At age 16, Abeni's written manuscript, The Prince Who Chose Love Over War, reached Queen Tamira of the united Kandora Zante realm. She was a fierce ruler with a mind as sharp as any sword. Curious, she read it alone in her chamber. She didn't sleep that night. Tamira had been raised on the version of the story where Milan was foolish, Lucius was weak, and Elias was a loyal prince betrayed. But Abeni's tale was different, it bled truth. It told of love weaponized, duty misunderstood, and war born from broken men. The next week, the queen summoned Abeni to the capital. "You did not write for fame," she said. "You wrote for healing. This story must live in every school, on every stage." And just like that, the tale of the fallen 3 became required reading across the realm. In the mountains where Zante warriors once trained, now stood the Temple of Reconciliation. Its bell rang once every year on the anniversary of the river fall. Elders and students gathered in white cloth to read aloud from the prince who chose love over war. Lucius's speech before he went to the bridge had become sacred text. "I was not born of royalty, but of pain. And from that pain I choose peace." Some believed the words were rewritten for drama. Others swore they were true. Old soldiers who had once served King Mana came in silence, heads bowed. One even left his medals at the base of the temple steps. "We fought for orders," he told the child. "He fought for love. That is the greater cause." One rainy morning, Abeni, now older, wiser, and known as the healer of Kandora, was invited to speak at a gathering of foreign scholars. They wanted to know why the story resonated across lands untouched by the Kandoran War. Her answer was simple: because we've all been told who to be, instead of asked who we are. She spoke of Lucius, torn between blood and heart, of Milan, bound by duty and daring enough to choose passion, of Elias, twisted by jealousy and loss. This story is not just about royals. It's about all of us, she said. What happens when we forget to listen to ourselves, to love, to truth? The hall rose in applause, but Abeni didn't smile. She remembered her dream as a girl. Tell it right. And though she told it many times now, she knew the telling never truly ended. 50 years after the fall, an artist named Olamide unveiled his greatest work in the Lucian Hall of Peace. It was a mural that stretched 2 walls high and wide. On the left, Lucius and Milan danced under starlight, their hands nearly touching. On the right, Elias sat on a throne made of ash alone. The mural sparked controversy. Some thought it glorified weakness. Others saw a mirror of their own regrets. Abeni, now old, was wheeled in by her grandson to view it. She stared at it for a long time before whispering, "He got it right." As she left the hall, fireflies hovered near the windows. The gods swore they had never seen them in that season. Just nature, some said, but the storytellers of Lucian knew better. Some stories never end. They simply change the listener. In the marketplace of modern-day Lucian, a young man named Osei appeared. Tall, soft-spoken, with a birthmark over his left brow and eyes the exact hue of dusk. Elders paused when they saw him. He looked familiar. Not in face, but in energy, like an echo made flesh. Osei was a traveling herbalist, raised by a river widow in a far village. He'd never known his father, only that he was a man who left before his name could be taught. One evening he wandered into the Hall of Peace, stood before the mural of Lucius and Milan, and wept without knowing why. Later that night, a priestess approached him. In the archives of Candora's palace, a letter long forgotten resurfaced. It had been sealed with Milan's emblem, never opened, addressed simply, "To the child I will never meet." The ink had faded, but the words still burned. She had written it weeks before the river fall. In it, she spoke not only of her love for Lucius, but of a fear that stirred within her body. She suspected she was with child. "If you ever find this," she wrote, "know that you were born of a love that tried to rewrite fate. You are not the shame of kingdoms. You are their chance to begin again." The letter spread like wildfire through Lucian and Candora. People searched for descendants, for heirs. Some mocked it as myth, but others, especially those who saw Osei, believed the bloodline had returned. The revelation of a potential descendant of Lucius caused unrest in the royal council of Candora. Some welcomed the idea, romanticizing a legacy returned. Others feared it. A ghost prince, one elder called him, with no crown but all the attention. Queen Tamira, now in her final years, summoned Osei in secret. She studied his face, his mannerisms. "You are not Lucius," she said gently, "but I see a softness in you and strength." Osei only bowed. "I never asked to be anyone but me." Still the whispers didn't stop. Was he born of legend or just carried by it? His presence became both hope and threat, reminding the kingdom that stories never truly sleep. They wait patiently for their next chapter. Now frail and near blind, Abeni asked to see Osei. They met beneath the Iroko tree where Milan once wrote her poems. She reached for his hand, fragile and trembling. "You remind me of a boy I once imagined. He died before he could speak. But maybe he's speaking through you." Osei had brought her herbs, but what she really needed was closure. She asked him to promise something, not to chase the crown, not to prove the bloodline, but to carry the story. "Don't let them reduce it to romance," she whispered. "Tell the truth, tell the pain, the mistakes, the mercy." 2 nights later, Abeni passed quietly. Her scrolls were left in Osei's care. On the back of one, she had written her final words. "The heart remembers what history forgets." At the annual Day of the Storm celebration, fireflies returned in full glow. It was said that this year they hovered longer, danced brighter. Osei was asked to speak, he declined. Instead, he opened Milan's letter and read it aloud, his voice trembling like a reed in river wind. As he read, people wept. Old warriors bowed their heads. Children clutched their parents' hands. It was not just a reading, it was a resurrection. And when the final line echoed, "You are not the shame of kingdoms. You are their chance to begin again," even the queen stood. That night, the stars shone lower as if bowing, and somewhere deep in the forest near the river, 3 fireflies hovered longer than the rest, golden, flickering, eternal. After the festival, Osei was approached by nobles, scholars, and even foreign dignitaries. Some called him the heir of fire, others Lucius Reborn. But he recoiled from the attention. "I'm not a story," he often whispered. "I'm a man." Whispers turned to demands. Some wanted him crowned. Others wanted him silenced. He was offered estates, titles, then threats. Through it all, Osei remained grounded. "I will honor their memory," he said of Lucius and Milan, "but I will not become their myth." He returned to the forest for days, seeking solitude. There among the trees he met an old Candoran hunter who offered no praise or curiosity, only warmth. They shared roasted yam and silence. "People will try to define you," the hunter said. "Let them talk, but don't let them decide." Chapter 27. Love without a throne. Among the crowd at the Firefly Festival had been a sculptor named Naya, a quiet, sharp-eyed woman known for carving emotion into stone. She watched Osei from afar, not out of reverence but curiosity. "He looks more burdened than blessed," she told her sister. They met days later when Osei wandered into her workshop. He touched one of her pieces, an unfinished sculpture of Milan. "You've seen her," he said softly. Naya nodded. "In the river, in firelight, in grief." For hours they spoke of memory, art, and truth. Their connection grew slowly, not with declarations but with shared silences, meals, and wounds. Osei never told Naya what others called him. He only said, "I carry a story too heavy to lift alone." She smiled, then put it down just for a while. Within the royal court, uncertainty spread. Queen Tamira was aging, and no clear successor stood ready. The nobility was split, half loyal to the queen's daughter, a strategist known for logic, half hoping for a fresh start through Osei's lineage. Tamira, wise even in fading health, called her daughter and Osei to her chamber. "Power is like fire," she said, "useful, dangerous, and never truly owned." She offered Osei a choice, not a throne, but a seat at the council. Be the memory, not the monarch. Osei accepted on one condition: the council must seat a healer, a farmer, and an orphan. Let it reflect the people, not just the bloodlines. It was the boldest proposal in Candoran politics in 50 years. The court murmured, but Tamira approved. "Let the old ways breathe," she said, "or let them die." One morning, Osei and Naya traveled to the river where Lucius, Elias, and Milan had fallen. The water was quiet, its banks overgrown. Osei held in his hand a new letter, one he had written to the past, unsure who it would reach. He read aloud as Naya listened. "To the ones whose love drowned the war. Thank you. I never met you, but I have lived in the home your sacrifice built. I am no prince, but I am your proof." He let the letter go. The current took it slowly. Naya placed a small stone sculpture at the water's edge. 3 figures standing in a circle, arms linked. One looking up, one looking down, one looking forward. "May they guide us still," she said. And as they stood in silence, fireflies began to gather out of season, glowing softly. Osei began teaching at the Lucian Library, offering lessons in ethics, memory, and identity. His most famous class was titled "History is Not a Hero." He reminded his students that every story was told by someone with a reason. "Even this one," he'd say. Naya's sculpture of the 3 fallen royals became the centerpiece of a new memorial plaza, where artists gathered yearly to present works inspired by sacrifice, courage, and love. The plaza was renamed "The Prince Who Chose Love Over War" in honor of Milan's final journal entry. The story of Lucius, Milan, and Elias was now in its 3rd telling, once in pain, once in poetry, and now in purpose. And as children played near the riverbank, they'd point to the sculpture and ask, "Is that real?" And the elders would answer, "It was and still is." Welcome back to my channel African Tales by Ify. On today's episode is a tale spun from the shadowed alleys and gleaming towers of a city where ambition is currency and trust, a dangerous gamble. Tonight, we delve into a story of whispered promises and shattering truths, a narrative woven with threads, ambition, and the sharp, cold edge of betrayal. Prepare to journey with me into the heart she gave, betrayal in the city of power. Find a comfortable spot, perhaps a warm drink, and let the city lights outside your window fade as we step into a world where every smile hides a secret and every heart holds a vulnerability. This is not just a story. It's an echo from the very soul of a metropolis built on dreams and broken by deceit. Are you ready to listen? In the polished heart of Abuja, where glass towers kissed the sky and powerful men played chess with the lives of the forgotten, Lizzie lived her dream. Or so she thought. She was married to Ken, a respected entrepreneur with influence spanning beyond the corridors of the National Assembly. To the world, they were the perfect Abuja couple, he tall and ambitious with a smooth tongue, and she soft and round-bodied, motherly, and fiercely devoted. Their marriage was the envy of their church community, their photographs gracing society pages, their hashtags trending on Instagram after every getaway to Dubai or Cape Town. But beneath the glamour of Jabi Lake dinners and Asokoro garden parties, life had its own cruel plans. Ken's health deteriorated rapidly, his body betraying him in the form of kidney failure. The doctors at Nisa Premier Hospital gave him a grim verdict. He needed a kidney transplant. His siblings and friends quietly disappeared behind their tinted SUVs, unwilling to risk their bodies for him. In the darkness of the ICU, it was Lizzie who stepped forward, offering a piece of herself, saying, "What is love if not sacrifice?" Her sacrifice was splashed across blogs, hailed as the ultimate act of devotion. Even politicians praised her bravery. Ken survived. The surgery was a success. And Abuja, that city of whispers and masks, moved on. But for Lizzie, the story was only just beginning as she began to put on weight from medications post-surgery. With his new lease on life, Ken emerged from the hospital with fresh vigor, his charm sharper, his ambitions even more ruthless. He began spending more nights in the hidden VIP rooms of Abuja's exclusive clubs, mingling with women half his age who knew nothing of the woman who gave him life. His eyes no longer saw Queen's curves as the softness of love, but as flaws in a city obsessed with perfection. He avoided her gaze, embarrassed to be seen in public with a woman the city now labeled matronly. The whispers came fast. People who once envied Lizzie now pitied her behind designer sunglasses. They said, she gave him her kidney but lost his love. The gossip circles of Maitama and Woos buzzed with stories of Ken's new mistress, Bola, a slender, ambitious socialite with connections to Abuja's power brokers. Bola was everything Ken now craved, a trophy, a statement, a woman who wouldn't remind him of ICU nights and hospital smells. Lizzie watched silently as her husband drifted into the arms of another, her nights spent alone in their marble-floored mansion in Gwarimpa, crying into silk pillows that once heard promises of forever. She tried everything to hold on: spa makeovers, gym memberships, even consultations with Abuja's most expensive stylists. But Ken had already replaced her, not just in his heart but in their social circle. The day the divorce papers arrived, delivered coldly by a smiling courier in a gleaming suit, was the day Lizzie realized Abuja wasn't built for women like her. It was a city that celebrated shiny facades but turned its back on wounded hearts. The same society that cheered her sacrifice now shared memes of her, mocking her weight, calling her a cautionary tale of women who let themselves go. She locked herself away in their once shared mansion, the laughter of her past haunting every chandelier, every corridor lined with photos of a love that was now just curated content on her private Instagram account. Ken moved out publicly, flaunting his new arm candy at every state function, their romance becoming tabloid headlines. In the stillness of those nights, Lizzie's pain fermented into something stronger. The city that tried to break her forgot that the deepest scars often birth the fiercest warriors. Lizzie wiped her tears, painted her lips with the color of survival, and prepared to reclaim the city that tried to silence her. Lizzie didn't flee the city that betrayed her, she owned it. She began attending wellness events, first as a silent participant, then as a speaker. She shared her story not as a victim, but as a survivor. Women flocked to her gatherings, relating to the tales of betrayal behind glass doors, of marriages that left them empty after giving everything. She founded Heart of Lizzie, a foundation aimed at helping women who gave too much and received too little. Her once hushed story became a movement. She appeared on television shows, featured in podcasts, even gracing magazine covers not for her pain, but for her rebirth. The same Abuja influencers who once mocked her now reposted her quotes, singing her praises. Meanwhile, Ken's fairy tale with Bola collapsed under the weight of fraud allegations and public disgrace. The city that once cheered him now turned its back. He tried crawling back into Lizzie's life, calling, pleading, but she had built walls made not of spite, but of peace. She had given him her kidney once, but she would never give him her soul again. Abuja crowned Lizzie its new queen, not in politics or social events, but in the hearts of the broken and betrayed. She became a voice for every woman who dared to start over, who learned that dignity cannot be bought in loose markets or borrowed from a man's last name. She built centers for healing across the city, creating safe spaces where women wore their scars like crowns. She turned her Gwarimpa mansion into a shelter for survivors, filling its empty halls with laughter once more. Abuja learned that a woman's worth is not defined by her dress size or marital status, but by the fire she carries in her spirit. And when the night came and the city lights shimmered like false promises, Lizzie stood on her balcony overlooking the city that once broke her, smiling. She realized she wasn't just the woman who gave her kidney. She was the woman who gave herself a second chance. Lizzie's face became the symbol of quiet defiance in Abuja. Her pictures graced the covers of wellness magazines. She sat on panels discussing healing, betrayal, and dignity, often facing women who carried stories just like hers, abandoned, mocked, yet breathing. She told them how survival was not just a decision, it was a duty to themselves. The once empty halls of her Gwarimpa mansion now overflowed with women and children who found shelter under her wings. She partnered with NGOs and hospitals, raising funds for organ donors, ensuring no woman had to bleed quietly for a man who might forget her name. Journalists labeled her the Phoenix of Abuja, but Lizzie didn't care for titles anymore. She had discovered something deeper, power not given by a husband or society, but earned through scars, tears, and nights spent curled into herself, whispering affirmations into the void. Yet in the midst of her blossoming empire, Lizzie knew Abuja wasn't done testing her. In a city where egos inflated faster than egusi soup bubbles, power and jealousy were siblings. Men she once called friends now regarded her as a threat. Ken, watching from the shadows, brewed a storm of bitterness. Ken's downfall wasn't loud. It was slow, painful, and humiliating. The allegations started with whispers, embezzlement, failed tenders, unpaid loans. Bola, ever the social climber, had already jumped ship to another politician from the north. Ken found himself alone in a rented flat in Kubwa, a far cry from the penthouse they once shared in Maitama. His calls to old friends went unanswered. His name, once spoken with reverence, now triggered sneers in Abuja's social clubs. When his body began to weaken again, he turned to the same hospitals that once paraded him as a success story. But this time, no donor waited in the wings. Nurses barely acknowledged him. His pride prevented him from asking Lizzie for help, but his condition grew worse with each passing day. The powerful Ken had become a ghost haunting the corridors of a city that no longer feared him. It was during one of his lowest nights that he drunkenly stumbled upon a TV interview where Lizzie spoke about forgiveness. It pierced him deeper than any disease. But even as his tears wet his torn shirt, he knew Lizzie had moved on. Lizzie knew that healing was more than just moving on. It was about lifting others along the way. She created the Council of Broken Wings, a network of women from Abuja's slums, suburbs, and even glass-towered enclaves, all with stories soaked in betrayal. Together they created businesses, sold Ankara, launched wellness cafes, hosted empowerment dinners, and rewrote the rules of engagement in a city that told women they were nothing without men. One evening, as she sat by her balcony watching Abuja's city lights flicker like false promises, she received a visitor. It was Ngozi, the same lawyer who once delivered her divorce papers. This time, Ngozi came not with legal threats but with tears. Her own husband had thrown her out for a younger woman. Lizzie welcomed her with open arms, whispering, "You are not the first and you will not be the last, but you will rise." Abuja watched in awe as Lizzie's home became a citadel of new beginnings. The city couldn't ignore her anymore. Politicians sought her endorsement. Media outlets begged for her interviews. But Lizzie knew her throne wasn't built on fame. It was built on pain, and pain doesn't crave applause. Ken, now a shell of the man he once was, finally swallowed his pride and stood at the gates of Lizzie's mansion, clutching the IV bag from the rundown clinic he could barely afford. He begged to see her, his voice cracked, his body trembling. But when Lizzie appeared, flanked by women who now guarded her like warriors, she looked at him not with hate, but with pity. She listened as he groveled, as he cried, as he blamed the city, his weakness, even Bola. But when he finally asked for forgiveness, Lizzie simply said, "Forgiveness is for me, not for you. You will not find healing in the place you destroyed." She handed him a card for a shelter she built for men trying to rebuild their lives. That was the last charity she offered him. The media caught wind of the scene, capturing photos of Ken's broken figure leaving her gates, face hidden behind cheap sunglasses. Abuja gossiped, but Lizzie no longer cared. She understood now her healing wasn't about revenge. It was about never letting her past crawl back into her present. Abuja crowned Lizzie its queen, but queenship in the city of masks comes with thorns. There were those who resented her rise, men in powerful circles who felt threatened by a woman who taught others how to live without them. False stories circulated online, accusing her of exploiting women's pain for fame, mocking her body even as they feared her influence. But Lizzie remained unshaken. She knew that no throne, even one built on ashes, would come without snakes. She spoke louder, traveled further, wrote a book that climbed bestseller lists, and built safe houses in Abuja's darkest corners. And on the night of her birthday gala, as the who's who of Abuja gathered to honor her, Lizzie stood before them, wearing a gown stitched with symbols of resilience, and told them, "I am not here to make you comfortable. I am here to remind you that a woman's body is not her currency, and her love is not a death sentence." The hall roared in applause, and deep within the shadows, Ken, frail and forgotten, watched, knowing that he once held the heart of this woman and threw it into the gutters of Abuja. Lizzie's nights changed from lonely sobs into graceful solitude. She learned to sip her wine alone on the penthouse balcony, watching Abuja's skyline shimmer in silence. What was once a bitter loneliness became a quiet, powerful space of reflection. She realized that the world teaches women to fear being alone, to chase after scraps of love, but Abuja taught her that loneliness could become the soil where self-love blooms. She took dance classes, explored new cities, and even started painting, something she abandoned in her university days. Abuja noticed the change. Lizzie became an enigma, the woman who gave her kidney and yet danced alone in the city's most expensive restaurants without apology. She was no longer defined by her ex-husband, nor the betrayal that nearly broke her. She became known as the woman who turned heartbreak into a throne. But even queens bleed in private. On the night of her divorce anniversary, Lizzie stood in front of her old wedding photo, a glass of champagne trembling in her hand. She whispered to the version of herself in the picture, You did your best. And she toasted to the girl she used to be, now buried in the ruins of love. Power attracts both allies and enemies. Within Lizzie's council of broken wings, a serpent slithered quietly. It was Chioma, a former socialite turned activist, whose envy toward Lizzie brewed behind masked smiles. She whispered into the ears of powerful men, sowing seeds of doubt about Lizzie's rise, telling them she was exploiting women's pain for profit. Her betrayal wasn't immediate. It was slow like poison in wine. She sabotaged Lizzie's deals, spread rumors among NGOs, and when the press picked up her lies, Abuja's chatter rooms lit up again. For a moment, Lizzie felt the weight of the world crushing her once more. But this time she didn't cry into silk pillows. She faced the snake with the grace of a lioness. At a press conference, Lizzie silenced the city. She laid bare her financials, her charities' receipts, and brought forth hundreds of women who testified to her impact. She didn't defend herself out of fear, but out of duty to the women she served. Chioma was exposed, her jealousy laid bare for all to see. The city devoured her, and Lizzie walked away head high, heart unshaken. The irony of life whispered into Lizzie's ear in the form of an old friend, Yemi. A widower, calm and steady like the Abuja sunset, Yemi saw Lizzie not as a broken woman, but as a warrior with battle scars that gleamed like jewels. He didn't try to save her. He simply sat beside her at fundraisers, walked with her through markets, and listened, truly listened. Lizzie resisted at first. Her heart, still coated in the dust of betrayal, refused to trust another man. But Yemi was patient. He reminded her that love, when pure, does not demand, does not rush, and never feeds on sacrifice. Slowly, cracks appeared in her fortress, and laughter crept into spaces once filled with silence. But even as she let him in, she warned him, "I will never again shrink for any man." And Yemi smiled, replying, "Then I will rise to meet you." Their story wasn't built on grand gestures, but on quiet moments, the way he held her hand during storms, the way he saw her not as a victim, but as a queen in her own right. Abuja never forgets its kings, no matter how dethroned. Ken, now penniless and sick, returned to the tabloids after collapsing at a cheap clinic in Nyanya. The media, hungry for scandal, reopened old wounds. They hunted Lizzie for comments, begging her to throw salt on her ex-husband's open wounds. But Lizzie refused to play their game. When they asked her what she felt seeing the man who abandoned her now begging for alms, she simply said, "I feel nothing. I left that chapter behind. My story has moved on." The world applauded her restraint, but deep inside, a small part of Lizzie mourned the man she once loved, the Lizzie of old, the man who used to hold her hand in crowded streets. She visited his bedside quietly one night, not as an ex-wife but as a human. She told him, "I forgave you long before you fell." She handed him the address of a rehabilitation center her foundation funded and left. She didn't stay to hear his reply. Closure wasn't for him, it was for her. Abuja crowned Lizzie's foundation with its highest humanitarian award at the Festival of New Queens, an event she created to honor women who rose from betrayal, abuse, and abandonment. The city's most powerful gathered under twinkling fairy lights, watching as women who once hid their pain now wore their strength like crowns. Lizzie, dressed in an emerald gown that celebrated every curve she once hated, stood at the podium, her voice steady. "We are no longer the women who gave too much. We are the women who learned to keep something for ourselves." The applause shook the ground, and tears flowed freely, not just from the women, but from men who finally saw what strength looked like in its most graceful form. That night, Abuja belonged to Lizzie and the broken women she taught to rise again. And in the crowd, Yemi stood not as a rescuer, but as an admirer of a woman who rebuilt her throne from the ashes of betrayal. Lizzie finally allowed herself a dinner date with Yemi at the famed Zuma Rock Garden restaurant, an exclusive spot where Abuja's elite gathered. She wore a simple, elegant gown, no longer feeling the need to impress the world, only herself. For the first time in years, she laughed without the weight of performance. Yemi listened more than he spoke, his eyes reflecting not lust but respect. Over bowls of ensala soup and glasses of palm wine, they spoke of everything: politics, childhood wounds, favorite books, and the type of love that doesn't burn but warms gently over time. Abuja's socialites watched them, curious, whispering tales of the once betrayed woman, now glowing beside a man who didn't need to compete with her spotlight. Yet Lizzie knew she was treading carefully. The city still held scars for women like her. Yemi understood. He didn't ask for her trust overnight. He earned it sip by sip, smile by smile. By the end of the evening, as they stood overlooking the city's glowing skyline, Lizzie whispered, "Perhaps not all endings are tragic." Yemi smiled, saying nothing, letting the quiet be their shared language. Despite the happiness Yemi brought into her life, Lizzie knew true healing demanded more. She embarked on a journey outside Abuja, visiting rural communities, reconnecting with her roots in Enugu, where her mother once taught her that a woman's strength wasn't in her waistline, but in her heart. She sat under the old Udala tree where she played as a child, letting the village women braid her hair, listening to their stories of heartbreak, betrayal, and survival. It reminded her that her pain wasn't unique, that women everywhere carried the burden of giving too much in a world that gave too little back. In those dusty streets, Lizzie left behind the last pieces of bitterness. She cried, danced, and allowed herself to be human again. When she returned to Abuja, she was lighter not in body, but in spirit. She no longer craved validation, she craved only peace. While Lizzie's star rose, Ken's empire collapsed fully. His properties were auctioned, his name wiped from Abuja's inner circles. Even Bola, the woman he once flaunted, abandoned him after the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission froze his last accounts. He became a cautionary tale, a meme in the city's gossip blogs. In a city that chewed and spat out the weak, Ken became invisible. He tried rebuilding from scraps, but his past sins haunted him like ghosts in a dark corridor. No bank would lend him money. No partner would trust his handshake. The streets he once drove through in convoys now became battlegrounds of humiliation. And still, Ken couldn't face himself in the mirror. His sickness returned, this time not in the body, but in the spirit. Even the church rejected his desperate confessions. Abuja moved on, and for the first time, Ken realized the weight of the woman he discarded. Lizzie transformed her Guarimpa mansion into a therapy garden called the Garden of Hope. Here, women and men came to heal, to rebuild, to remember that they were more than the betrayals they survived. It became a sanctuary where pain met purpose. She hosted open forums, poetry nights, and business workshops. She launched scholarship programs for children of abandoned mothers. Abuja's elite couldn't ignore her anymore. Governors, CEOs, and even first ladies sought her counsel. But Lizzie remained grounded, always reminding herself, "This is not about me. This is about the broken who need a lighthouse." Her foundation expanded into other states. What started as her personal healing journey became a movement. Women who once hid their scars now flaunted their crowns. Abuja learned a new kind of power, the kind that didn't roar but whispered. At a state banquet held in Transcorp Hilton, Lizzie was awarded Nigeria's Medal of Courage. As she stood on stage, wearing a dress stitched with symbols of healing, the crowd rose in thunderous applause. Even Yemi, now her fiancé, watched from the crowd with quiet pride. As she held the medal, she paused, remembering the woman who once sat crying into a pillow soaked in betrayal. She whispered to her old self, "You survived, Queen." She ended her speech not with bitterness, but with a proverb from her mother. A woman's worth is not in how many times she is broken, but in how many times she rebuilds her throne. Abuja roared. And in the shadows, a frail broken Ken watched on a borrowed phone from a dingy bar in Karu, tears streaming down his face, not for Lizzie, but for the man he could have been. Abuja nights were getting colder, but Lizzie's heart was warmer than ever. The Garden of Hope now attracted global attention. Documentaries, interviews, and charity galas placed her at the center of conversations about forgiveness, healing, and women's empowerment. Yet one night, standing before her bathroom mirror, she caught a glimpse of the woman she once was, the scared, overweight wife who gave everything. It was at that moment Lizzie realized the journey never truly ends. Healing isn't a finish line but a daily practice. She touched the faint scar on her side where they took her kidney and smiled sadly. That scar no longer symbolized loss. It represented the life she saved, not just Ken's but her own. In that mirror she whispered, "I forgive you, Ken." Not because he deserved it, but because she deserved the freedom of letting go. Ken, now reduced to a shadow of his former self, found his way to Lizzie's public seminar. He stood among the crowd of strangers, frail and trembling. The once powerful man now looked like any other forgotten face in Abuja's streets. After the session, he gathered the courage to approach her. When their eyes met, the entire room seemed to freeze. The air thickened with unspoken pain. Ken fell to his knees, sobbing not for mercy, but from shame. "I came not for pity, Lizzie," he whispered, "but to tell you, you were the only person who truly loved me." The room held its breath. Lizzie walked toward him, helped him up, and simply said, "And that love was wasted the day you saw me as less." She hugged him gently, not out of longing, but out of closure. The crowd wept silently, witnessing a man crumble before the woman he once tried to destroy. Yemi proposed under the stars at the Garden of Hope. It wasn't flashy or extravagant. It was simple, just them, surrounded by women who now called Lizzie their beacon. The ring wasn't the size of her past diamonds, but it sparkled with sincerity. Lizzie smiled, not with the naivety of her past self, but with a heart that finally knew peace. "I am not a princess to be rescued," she told him. "I am a queen who built her castle from rubble." Yemi grinned. "Then I will sit beside you on your throne, not above you." Their wedding became the talk of Abuja, not because of its grandeur, but because of its humility. Instead of politicians and celebrities, they invited widows, orphans, and broken women who once lost their voices. It was a feast of love born not from pain, but from healing. Months after the wedding, a tabloid tried to stir scandal by publishing a story claiming Lizzie seduced Yemi for his wealth. The city's gossip mills spun again, but this time Lizzie didn't flinch. She faced the cameras and owned her narrative. "I gave a man my kidney and he left me because I was fat," she said into the microphones. "Now I love a man who loves me with all my scars. I have nothing to prove to a city that once tried to bury me alive." Her words silenced the room. Abuja cheered and social media exploded with praise. Women across Africa flooded timelines with hashtags like Lizzie Rises, Scars and Crowns, and Hearts She Gave. Lizzie's story became a symbol of Africa's modern woman, strong, unbroken, and unapologetically visible. Lizzie's story culminated in the unveiling of her biggest project yet, a wellness center dedicated to organ donors named Lizzie's Heart. The inauguration gathered dignitaries from across Nigeria, and the president himself cut the ribbon. Ken, now weak and wheelchair-bound, watched quietly from the back, tears rolling down his wrinkled face. Lizzie didn't acknowledge him directly, but as she took the stage, she said, "Some betrayals destroy you, others build you into monuments." Abuja stood still as Lizzie declared, "This city tried to break me, but I rebuilt myself and now I build for others." Because sometimes the heart you give away teaches you how to love yourself first. The ovation shook the city, and as Lizzie walked away from the podium, she looked up at the Abuja skyline, smiling at the woman she had become. Months later, Lizzie received an unexpected invitation. It was from Ken. He was dying. Cancer, the doctor said. She debated whether to visit, unsure if seeing him would reopen old wounds. But Yemi encouraged her. Sometimes the greatest closure is to see the past for what it really is, a closed chapter. Ken was a shadow of the man she once knew. The sparkle in his eye was gone, replaced by regret. He struggled to speak, but his eyes did the talking. Lizzie sat beside him, holding his frail hand, not as a wife, not even as a woman scorned, but as a fellow human facing their end. "I thought money was everything," Ken whispered weakly. "But in the end, no one stands beside me, except the woman I abandoned." Lizzie smiled gently, her tears honest but without bitterness. "Forgiveness was never for you, Ken. It was for me," she whispered, walking away for the final time, lighter than she'd ever felt. At the annual Abuja Women's Leadership Summit, Lizzie delivered a speech that would echo through the ages. She stood before a crowd of thousands, her once timid voice now thunderous with conviction. "You can give a man your heart, your kidney, your body, your youth, but never give him your power." Her speech was raw, filled with stories of pain, betrayal, and triumph. She spoke to the girl in the village who thinks her body is the only currency she has. She spoke to the wife abandoned for a slimmer model. She spoke to every woman who gave too much and was left with too little. That night, her speech trended worldwide. She wasn't just Lizzie of Abuja anymore. She was Lizzie of Africa. Her story, her scars, her lessons became the rallying cry for women to stop shrinking for love and start expanding for themselves. When Ken finally died, his funeral was quiet, almost empty. The Abuja elites stayed away, and the only attendees were a few estranged family members and ex-business partners there out of obligation. Even Bola did not show up. Lizzie sent a wreath, not of roses, but of thorny acacia flowers, symbolizing the painful love they shared. She didn't attend. She chose instead to spend the day hosting a fundraiser for single mothers, using the memory of her pain to fuel the hope of others. The newspapers didn't bother with front-page headlines for Ken's death. His end was as quiet as his beginning had been loud. And as the earth swallowed his body, the city moved on, whispering his name only in hushed cautionary tales. Lizzie no longer needed applause. She traveled, wrote books, and built wellness centers. She loved Yemi in a way that was soft and slow, not the suffocating desperation of her past marriage. On her 40th birthday, she sat with her closest friends under Abuja's stars, reflecting on the girl she once was. She toasted to scars, to heartbreak, to betrayals that taught her who she truly was. "I no longer need to prove myself to anyone," she told her circle. "Not even myself, I am enough as I am." The women clinked glasses, celebrating the queen who didn't just rise again, but built a kingdom no betrayal could crumble. Years later, children would gather in Lizzie's garden of hope, listening to her story. They would touch the mural of her scar and understand it not as a mark of loss, but as a badge of survival. She taught them that betrayal might take your heart, but it should never take your future. That giving shouldn't be reckless, and loving someone should never mean abandoning yourself. And in the final scene of her story, as the camera would pan over Abuja's glowing skyline, Lizzie would smile into the horizon and whisper the words that made her a legend. "I gave my heart away, but I reclaimed my crown." And the world never forgot.